We should get started. This is the WIFS Los Angeles first webinar, and we're glad that you could all join us. I'm still hearing that some people are chiming in, so we're going to just get started. I'm gonna just spend a few minutes like we would do normally at our lunches, just speaking a little bit about our organization and welcoming you all here. So our new normal for a moment, and I hope everybody can hear me okay. So, so just to get started, WIFS is Women in Insurance and Financial Services, and we're a national organization made for the purpose of attracting, advancing, and developing women in the industry. We encourage you to become a member of our Los Angeles chapter if you aren't already, and we really do welcome the support. Today we have a speaker. She's actually one of our national board members. Her name is Chia-Li, and she is with she's actually with Cal Lutheran, and we're so excited to have her speak on this topic today. I think it's of great interest to all of us. So with that, I'm actually going to ask Chia-Li to take over at this time.
All right. Well, thank you, Bobby, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. I hope everyone has a safe and healthy environment at home. Many of us have to work from home, and some of you are lucky enough to continue to go into work. My husband is a first line responder. He works for the police department out in Charlotte. And so he doesn't have the luxury of working from home, not to mention that he has to have full gear on just to help out whatever the emergency responding is. And so I'm very fortunate to see that everyone are able to attend today's session. So thank you for doing that. And the topic that we are going to talk about is the retirement success rate, that how the reality is in the retirees space in the US. Now, if I were to get started with this, I wanted to make sure that you are able to participate as we go through the session. So I'm going to have you actually, I'm putting a chat in the chat box. There is a link that will allow you to go to the poll. During the session, I'm going to ask you to participate in questions. So take a moment to set that up. If you don't know where the chat box is, you should have an orange sign in the bottom of your screen that is clicking or shining. So click on that. You should be able to see the chat box that has a URL there. All you have to do is to go there and stand by as I go through the various different questions, and we'll have fun as we go through the presentation today. So if you have access to the chat box, you'll be able to use that URL as we go along. All right, with that, I'm going to move on to the next page. Now, many of us, speaking of retirement, whether or not you have this notion of the definition of retirement from yourself, or you hear that from your clients, your parents, and people surrounding you, we have a notion of either we are going to live happily ever after, or we're having a great relationship with our family members, and we're traveling around the world, and the world is really enjoyable and beautiful. I think that picture may have shattered just recently. A lot of the people that, depending upon when you asked them they retired, if they were to retire last year at the same time, I think they probably still have a good picture like this. But if they were to retire just a few weeks before the COVID-19 happened, the stock market may have shattered a portion of their wealth. And this is quite an interesting time that we are in, but also the fears around not just the virus, the fears around whether or not we are able to recover back. So a couple of the things that I wanted to kind of throw out there when you are speaking to clients, when you're working with your friends, families, and keep in mind that in the industry, whether or not you are financial advisors or financial planner, lots and lots of research in the past that are heavily focusing on one thing. And that is we're using the financial portfolio, which is typically your IRA account, your 401k, or this is a qualified plan, if you will. And you're using your annuity, you're using your perhaps life insurance, maybe you have a saving, checking, brokerage accounts, and so on and so forth. That's type of calculation that we typically do for clients. And that's type of the calculation we tend to look at to see how well the clients actually position themselves into the retirement or before they enter the retirement. But the problem is the largest assets in the US, the largest assets in the US is their house. All of us probably have a home or two or three. The largest assets tend to be your home. And home is the home equity portion of it is something that most of the advisors or planners don't necessarily taking into the consideration. Either our compliance doesn't tell us cannot do that, or we are not licensed to do it. Whatever the reason, there's something that is on the table that we never really have a chance to talk to our client. But this is the number one assets in US. And the other thing is that Social Security retirement benefits is the primary income source for many Americans. And as a matter of fact, that's more than majority of the American, that's their retirement resource coming in during retirement. So given with that, if we as an advisors or planner only focusing on this portion, I think that we're not doing a justice to help our clients to see things holistically. So what I also observe in the industry is that we also have this asymmetry type of picture to show clients where that's assumed that we start working, and I don't know about you, I start working somewhere around age 20. And then, many of your clients, if they're executives, they might tell you that this is the point that they want to retire. They might be, well, I don't know, 50 or 55 years old. Typically, your executive clients, or that's the range that they tell you they wanted to retire. People may tell you that they want to retire in their 30s and 40s. I think they may or may not realizing that what that meant. But for the most part, typical rank and file employees that you deal with, they are looking at about 60, 65. Very few actually delay their retirement, but they wanted to get to this point. We assume that, and there are many things that we assume people will do during this time, during the 20 to 60 years old. Let's just assume that we are looking at this age group, 60 years old to retire. During that 40 years of time, each one of the clients you deal with, they're so disciplined of savings, and they're so disciplined to do their job. They never get fired. They never change their jobs, and their salary continue to increase as predicted. And nothing bad happened to their life, and they move on. And by the time they hit this point, they save plenty that they can go retire. Now, in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking that's not true. Right, that's not true, because not everybody is lucky enough to have nothing change in their life, unless they're a trust baby. That's a little bit different, but they have a different type of problems to deal with. And then the big problem began when you at the retirement stage, where you are also very disciplined of spending the amount of money, spending down amount of money that you don't overspend. You are very disciplined about it. And not to mention, economy will continue to thrive and never have a down economy. And your stock market return will always maintain the level you're expecting. Again, that's not necessarily going to be true for many of us. And many of us in the industry probably have seen ups and downs of the market several times. If you're in the business long enough, you know that there's already several times. Now, another big problem in the decumulation stage, which is the time that you actually retired, many of us probably are asking clients, when do you think, for those of you that sell insurance probably would have a better conversation than I do for that, you're probably asking, when do you think that you're going to die? And why do we ask that? So let's just assume that it's a 90 years old, and that's 30 years here. So that means that if I if I am planning to retire at 60, I start working at 20, I save 40 years, and I'm going to spend 30 years of the money. That's great. But we are not looking at what if I live out to 100 or even older. Oh, by the way, by the time I die here at this point, I have $0 left in my account. Perfect. A symmetry, I will perfectly grow my assets during my accumulation stage, and I'll spend disciplinedly during my decumulation age. At the time that I die, I have $0 left. That's great, but that's not necessarily the reality, right? What's going to happen is that many of us potentially will see clients that retire too early, and then they ran out of the money too early. And when they do that, there's really no way to save them if they don't have anything else left. So given the fact that we talked about the number one assets is the home, people who tend to have Social Security as their primary income, people tend to retire. Oh, by the way, if you retire earlier than 60, sometimes it's not because you want to, it's because you got sick or something happened to life that you cannot work. As much as you want to work, you can't. And so things happen. And with that type of environment, it's really hard to help clients guide through that unless you guide them through properly as early as possible. So oftentimes when a client comes to my office, the very first thing that I don't ask them about their assets, obviously, I wanted to know what would they do during retirement. And this movie you're probably seeing already, where Robert De Niro was a retired executive. He really doesn't have much to do in his life, so he decided to become a senior, meaning aged senior, intern at this company, and then working for this young executives, a startup company. The idea behind here is that many of your clients are needing to answer that questions for a good reason. What they plan to do will have significant impact of how they're going to spend the money or spend down their assets. And so I have a habit of asking clients, what will you do? And you'll be surprised to see how many clients are unable to answer that question. Even for those who retired, maybe 10 years into the retirement, they are still asking themselves the question. And they oftentimes comes to their friends and their family saying they don't feel fulfilled during retirement. So I will recommend you that as you work with clients, ask that questions. This is the simple questions. If they can't tell you what it is, assign them as a homework to think about it, because that's going to impact how you help them in terms of retirement. There is a terminology that I will really encourage you to work with your clients on it. It is called the retirement balance sheet. Now, this is not your typical balance sheet. It only have assets and it only have liabilities. And what this does is trying to do the best it can to use the assets to match up the liability portion of it, making sure that your clients have enough throughout their retirement. Now, of course, the assets portion are something you accumulate during your lifetime, and then you use that to spend down as you are in the retirement stage. So let's go through some of the assets that you typically see. Now, we do know this portion of it is something that you and I see every day for clients' account. It could be your checking, savings, retirement account, brokerage account, insurance, annuities, you name it. Everything's in that bucket. And that bucket is oftentimes get discussed, get calculated, get performance review, and things like that. But that's not the only asset that you need to pay attention of. So look at the human capital assets. This is the portion of someone who chose to continue to work. It can be part-time, it can be full-time, and it is not necessarily working because they need money. That's great. If they need money, that's great. If they don't, that's even better, because you're keeping up physically and mentally fit during your retirement. So human capital is something that oftentimes we don't discuss with clients, and we really need to discuss that. The second thing is your home equity. As I mentioned, this is your number one asset. Your client's number one assets potentially is their home equity. That is something that we don't really talk about. And for whatever the reason, the compliance reason or the licensing issue, that we just don't talk about that. So something that to keep in mind as you go through the work with clients. Now, social capital. Social capital is very interesting, where we mentioned about social capital in terms of Social Security. This is from an income perspective, that's a number one resources for majority of the Americans. That also come with the Medicare. Some is fortunate to have pension, but most importantly, some may have families and community to support them in addition to the Social Security and pension. And two other assets that we oftentimes overlooked, and that is rental, real estate. A lot of clients have them, but if you don't do a good asking the questions, you may miss out the opportunity that could generate income as well. And business entity, many of you sitting in this webinar today, you probably own your own business. It's got value too. None of these are typically being in the discussion with clients, primarily because either for your business model reason or whatever the reason that you just don't have the opportunity to talk about it. I will recommend you to have that conversation as a value add for your clients, because those are the assets that they can definitely leverage to match up the liability. Now, obviously, the fixed income portion of it, this is your fixed expenses. Depending upon the state, depending upon the age that you are in, the spending varies. If your assets on the left-hand side will allow you to match up the fixed expenses and have something left, then you move on to the next category of discretionary expenses. This is where you will go travel. This is where you can have certain type of lifestyles and so on and so forth. If you match the fixed expenses, discretionary expenses, and you still have assets left, that's where you can start talking about contingency. This is where many of you are expert in. You're talking about long-term care, health care. You're talking about other type of spending shocks. If someone got cancers, that additional expenses coming in may potentially shock their entire assets portion of it. So that's a contingency. Now, many of us is very fortunate to work with clients that have more than the 3 area covers. Potentially, they can talk about the legacy goal. Until you have every portion of this area cover up to this point, for the most part, you will not have enough to retire. And this is something that I often show clients, making sure that they understand that the amount of assets needs to be taken into consideration in retirement. There's a lot of options in here. Don't overlook them, and don't put them not as part of your discussion, because you do need to discuss them to see how can you best help them go through their retirement. Now, all of us done a very good job of helping our clients to assess how successful they would be. And many of our companies have software, commercial softwares, to calculate what is the successful rate for a certain client. If they have enough today, if they don't have enough today, can they actually afford to retire, so on and so forth. This formula oftentimes is used behind the scene of your commercial software. This is not a test, but just to let you know that what they stand for. So this is the value of the end of a year, which is T, and then equal to the previous year's balance times 1 plus the inflation adjusted return. So this is your return of the market, and this is your inflation. And of course, after that, you take out how much you're going to spend. That will give you your end of the year balance. Part of the problem with any type of planning is this: we make assumptions, and we assume that you, well, your client will die at, let's say, 90 years old. You assume that. And we are also very optimistic about assuming the average market return, right? We will, most advisors or investment expert will tell you that since the inception of the stock markets until today, the average is 7.6%. Okay, and that's true. And they will tell you that inflation, hey, how about we just assume 3% inflation then, or something else. And that's assumed that you are going to spend a percentage of your assets. And the Benjamin's rule of thumb rules back in the early 80s that has this 4% spending down rules. And we know that's not necessarily hold true for many Americans. And the problem with the formula here is that the formula itself is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. But any of the assumptions that I write on the screen, if something is wrong with it, the outcome of your calculation will be incorrect. We don't know how the market is going to perform, and you just witnessed the market went up and down because of a virus. You just seen that people who got the virus, and then some survive, some just don't. So how long you're gonna live is also unpredictable. And if you are safe and sound, that's great. But what if you have to spend more of your assets if you lost your job? A lot of these are assumptions, and assumption oftentimes doesn't necessarily stack up with the reality of the clients that you serve. So I decided that I wanted to take a broader picture look at not using the simulation, not using simulating a fictitious families. I went to the Census Department and I asked them, do you have information about the US populations who is age 62 and above? So they are 62 and above, and they already begun taking Social Security. They say, yes, we do. So I took the 2011, and you can imagine that 2011 is right after the 2008 crisis. So 2011, the assets is not necessarily the high point yet, but good enough to do a good assessment of the Americans. And out of there that I found roughly about 7,600 households within US, both couple, married couple and singles. And that the way that the Census Department, they do their collecting their data, they will estimate if for example, my family situation, how many of those families are in my geographical area representing the same type of assets or household information with other families. So that 7,600 households that I study in that represent approximately about 24 million households in US. So just to keep in mind, I'm actually using real data from real family that in the US about how they are going to perform if I put them through some sort of calculation. Instead of using the average market return, I took the Morningstar return information from 1926 to 2016. And I used something called the rolling return to do the calculation. Rolling return means that in any given even in any type of given economic cycle, I am able to capture ups and downs of the economic cycle to test out if you retire at a certain point. And then so the calculation is going to go through rolling return. Rolling return addressed the sequence of the return risks for many of the retirees. Then instead of just set up someone's going to die at age 90, I went to Social Security Administration. Social Security Administration, by the way, they do have a survival probability table. This is a table that they estimate how many of us are going to collect Social Security. And they're also betting that we would die early, so then they have plenty of a trust fund left for those people who needed Social Security. And so they have a table, and you might want to know how old that they used age to do that probability calculation. And you might be surprised to hear that they actually use up to age 119. So if I go back to my 60 years old retirement, that is beyond 40 years. That's beyond 40, even down to 50 years. This is how Social Security is calculating your probability. So I took their probability table and run everyone through the the calculation to see that if you were to survive this year, what's your probability of the success rate, if you were to survive next year, and so on and so forth until age 119. Then I went to the Census, Department of Statistics Bureau. I asked them to give me the average. This is the average state expenses during the retirement, and these are based upon age group. I did not take just an average nationally. I took the average of the state, every 50 states, based on 5 different age groups. And why is that? Because each age group is going to spend differently, and you will see a curve of spending during the retirement. Oftentimes, when you first retire, you spend the most money because you go out, travel, and have fun. Then slowly, you don't want to move much anymore. It's like a smile. And then you slow down your spending until to a point that you got a little bit older, and then your health care started to pick up. And then you have the uphill battle of spending more of that later year age. So I used a 5 different age group to study to see the spending pattern of every single average state, to run that against the household in the census data. Once I've gone through that, and then I go through 3 different strategies, and I'll report the result in just a moment. But the way I measure that is something called success rate. Many of us probably work with clients of using tons of different commercial software to figure out what that success rate is. So success rate is basically when someone died, let's say at age 119, we are assuming that there's a probability that each one of us is going to live until 119. I still have 1 penny left, okay? I still have 1 penny left in my account. So that's the success rate. And the success rate, oftentimes, depending upon what clients that you work with, you may have a success rate of 75% is good, 80% is good. But in this study, I assume the success rate at 90%. From there, and I looked at how much of those people who can actually spend the average of their state. I'm looking at the population in that particular state, of those population who can actually spend above the average of the retiree expenses. So I went through the calculation of that to determine what's going to happen. So with that, I'm going to be asking you, oh good, some of you have already answered the questions. What do you think the average weighted success rate is for US retirees? Take a look at the screen. We separated that by married couple and single. Is it 55 for the married couple, or is it single 63, or is it 65 versus 43, or is it 80 versus 70? So if you have not had a chance to answer the questions, I'm going to give you a moment to answer the questions. You don't have to be swayed by what's already on the screen. So keep in mind, success rate means that by the time you are age 119, you still have a penny left. All right, looks like everyone is sticking through that number, and probably you read the book. So yeah, you are correct. That is the correct answer, but let me share with you. I don't know about you, 65% or even 66, if I round up the number for a married couple as a success rate, I don't know about you. I don't think that sounds very successful. And if I were to look at the singles, 43%, that's definitely not necessarily means success, because keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, many of us in the industry use a success rate of 75%, 80% as a gauge point. And here is the reality. The reality is that the success rate, the weighted average success rate across the US, it's only about 66% for married couple, and for single is 43%. That means a lot of people are not going to make it. When a lot of people are not going to make it, there's a big problem in our society in terms of the burden of the society. So the other thing that I looked at was by age, by the net worth group. And as you can see on the chart here, that majority of the Americans tend to have a lot less net worth. But because the amount of people who is over $1 million, the small percentage of that, I only rounded up for above $1 million, because if I do 1 million, 5 million, 10, the number is so small, so I lump them together. As you can see, the higher the net worth are, the better it is for you are able to spend the average retirement expenses during your retirement. So you can see that curve goes up, and then you have much more opportunity to spend your assets comfortably. So having higher net worth is still a very good way of recommending your clients to work toward, because if they don't, chances are the ability for them to spend, the population that who can actually spend that kind of average goes down if you have less net worth. Now, for those of us who are in California, $1 million is not a lot. And so realistically, that may not be even helpful depending upon which states that you're actually living in. So here's the question. So how do each one of the states actually tally up? Average is great, but I wanted to know those percentage of the population that can actually spend above the state retirement expenses. So above the average state expenses, I wanted to see what the population percentage looks like. So I'm going to ask some of you to do a quick jot down on the number for me, because I'm going to ask you to compare the number when we get down to different strategies. So I'm going to ask Bobby to take down California's number. And I believe Jessica is still on the line. So Jessica, if you're still there, if you don't mind to jot down Washington State. And then Robert, I believe you're still on the line. If you are still on the line, you can jot down Florida for us. And John, I think you're still, hopefully you're still, yeah, John is still online. That if you don't mind to jot down New York, okay? Monte, if you don't mind to jot down Texas. And then Gail, if you're still there, I think, yeah, Gail is still there. If you don't mind to jot down Pennsylvania. So you probably are asking, why am I asking you to jot down these states? Well, California, it has the largest retiree population according to the census data that I got. And the number 2 largest state is is actually Florida. Number 3 largest retiree state is Texas. And number 4 is New York, and number 5 is Pennsylvania. Now, the number is coming up. I'm just assigning each one of you to monitor the state. So as soon as I show the number of the state, so thank you, Gail, for asking that questions. And as soon as the number shows up, I'm going to ask you to copy down the number. It's going to display married couple versus single. So here we go with the number. So for California, only 51% of the married couple or 37% of the single population will be able to spend that state average retirement expenses or spend above that expenses. So that's a California. Hopefully, Bobby, you have the number down. Taxes, this is where, Monte, if you don't mind to jot down the number for married couple is 61%. You can see the differences here now. California is 51, Texas is 61%, and then the single is 40%. So you can see the 2 states, one is doing a little bit better than the other. Now let's take a look at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, I believe that's Gail. That married couple is 52%. Single is 41%. All right, so you can see the severity of the state, that some of the state, majority of them are not going to be able to spend the average expenses on that particular state. Florida, a little bit better, by far best so far. Couple is 63 or 64%. Single is 44 or 45%. Okay, and then New York. No, this one, yeah, this one is New York. New York, married couple is 56-ish%, and then single is 44 or 45% for New York. And let's take a look at 2 other states that's surrounding us that I did not ask anyone to jot down the number. Oh, actually, yes, Washington. The Arizona, by far, you can see our neighbor state, Arizona is 86.5% for married couple and 62% for single. And Washington State, 77% for couple and single for 41. So by now, I hope that each one of you that has jotted down the number, because in a moment, we're going to compare that number. So this chart tells you something. This chart tells you not necessarily that you have to stay married. No, that's not what it means. Because a married couple tend to have two assets together and tend to have more assets to spend. But keep in mind, if you work with clients that are married or they are a married couple, that one of them is going to go first, and that one person will become the single person. So you need to keep in mind that I don't have Nevada in my slide. I can get Nevada's information to you afterwards. Every 50 states, the information is in the book that you can actually see that, but I can get the Nevada information to you, Darren. So if you don't mind to remind me after the session, I will get those information to you. So that is just the baseline. This means that if we don't do anything, just to take the existing retirees population, their assets, their expenses, and the probability of surviving till age 119, here is the population that will potentially make it. All right. Now, we know we are in a very low interest environment today. All of you are an expert in this area. Please go to that poll website and type in some answer for me. What are some options that you're telling your clients to do today? What is a good investment option in a low interest environment? If you cannot type that in the polls website, you can type it directly into the group chat box. So I'm going to ask you to type that into the group chat box or type it into the website. Real estate. Okay, so Darren mentioned about real estate. Anybody else? Any other would be a good investment options today? How about cash? Some people are still holding cash. Cash is actually not necessarily a bad thing. Yes, so Robert, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's potentially cash, real estate. Yeah, index annuity, who knew, right? There are a lot of people against index annuity, but this is a great time. Gold, right? Commodity, it potentially could be an option. Yeah, it doesn't have to be index annuity, it could be just annuities, right? So there's a lot of investment options today, ranging from cash, index annuities, commodities, real estate, and so on and so forth. And so with the low interest environment, your clients are going to have hard time catching up the inflation, right? The purchasing power, chances are not going to be necessarily a pretty picture for them. So what I did in the research was I included two different types of strategies. I include using reverse mortgage or delaying Social Security or working for 1 more year, 2 more years, 3 more years, 5 more years. And so I run through the calculation to see which one actually has the best result. So let's take a look at reverse mortgage for now. I'm going to ask you to put the answer in there. Will reverse mortgage or HECM, short for HECM, enhance the retiree success? Okay, so thank you, Robert, for answering that in the group chat box. Okay, so Darren says B as well, and Robert says C, and most of you on the screen says B. Now, I intentionally put A in there, and I know you are very smart that not to pick that one, but I have to tell you that even when I mention that to a client, they will tell me reverse mortgage is a scam. But I wanted to remind everyone, reverse mortgage, maybe there were scams before, but today is a federally HUD program. So it's not, HECM is not necessarily a scam in today's age. Evan, thank you very much for answering that in the group chat box. So what is the correct answer? The correct answer is C. They will, if those people actually qualify for reverse mortgage. So I took the data that you just looked at, all of those states that I asked you to jot down the number, and then look at the US population. And then I run through all the number based on the current reverse mortgage guidelines to see how many of those family actually qualify for reverse mortgage. And if they do qualify, what if I use that cash from the reverse mortgage to supply their retirement spending? Will that actually improve the overall success? Will that actually improve the ability for them to spend more than the state average retirement expenses? I won't have time to go through the criteria of the HECM or reverse mortgage, but in general, there is a cap. You can only, let's say if your house is worth $1 million, you cannot just base on $1 million. The cap is approximately about 850 something thousand. And then you don't just take the entire amount out of that cap. There is a percentage, we call that the principal limit amount, that is correlating the interest rate. The lower interest rate that we are today, the higher percentage that you can take out of that particular home value. Then you have several options. And you can take it out as a lump sum. You can take it out as a monthly payment comes in. And when the person who actually passed away owning that particular home that has reverse mortgage, whatever is left of that asset will then go to the heir. So reverse mortgage potentially can be a good option for many of those families who are using the line of credit of reverse mortgage as a standby option, or simply just to supplement their income. Now, again, this is something that's not being talked about among the advisors or the planners, because we don't necessarily have any benefits to talk about it. First off, we're not qualified to do this. We don't get compensated by telling clients about the HECM. As a matter of fact, even if you recommend them to go through HECM, they have to go through the HECM designated counselor to go through the course, qualify for it before they move forward with the program. So it's a very stringent program, making sure that they understand what they are. So in my research, I actually show you every single state, what is the percentage of that particular state's family actually qualify for the reverse mortgage. So in here, I like you to think about, so if I were to compare based on the previous success rate or the population, for those families who qualify, what do you think is the improvement of the overall population for those who actually qualify for the reverse mortgage? Is it the 5.2% of the population improved in a couple and single at 10, or is it 12%, single at 18%, and couple at 21, or single at 28%? What do you think? So most of you believe that the largest amount of 21%. Keep in mind that depending upon the state that you're in, I'm looking at the average of the US, and in a moment you're going to be able to see each one of the state to do the comparison. Actually, the correct answer is the couple improvement nationally is only 5.2%, single at about 10%. Primarily the reason is not a lot of family is qualified for that situation. So let's take a look at your answer. So this is the time I'm going to actually ask you to compare the number that you have written down. All right, so let's take a look at this. So once you see the number, I'd like you to type that into the group chat box so we know the improvement of that particular state. So this is, I'm going to start in California. After looking at using the HECM, you can see the number changed. The couple have went up to 61% of the population will be able to make the spending above the state expenses average. The singles are also went up to 46%. So Bobby, I'm going to ask you to potentially type your answer into the group chat box of what is the improvement that you see based on California state. All right, I hope that you guys are ready. I'm going to move on and tell you the next day and asking you to do some quick calculations so you can share that number accordingly. Texas, the couple is going up to 67%. Single goes up to 48%. Pennsylvania went from, the couple went up to 57 or almost 58%. Single went up to almost 50% there. Florida, couple was 73%. Single is 48%. And New York, couple went up to 66%. Single is about 50% or so. Arizona is about 90%, 90% for Arizona for couple, and single is for 67. And Washington State is couple is almost 80% and single is 52%. So Bobby had put down for the California, I believe California has a double-digit increase in the couple. And then, yeah, and then the singles actually has also about 10% or so improved population. So thank you very much. So John had mentioned about in New York, couple improvement is about 10%, single is about 5% or so. And so as you can see that using the reverse mortgage can drastically change the overall populations of the state that you are measuring. So Gail mentioned about Pennsylvania, married couple improved about 5.5%, single improved about 8% or so. So as you can see that every single state has a little bit different. Robert mentioned about Florida improves. Yeah, so Florida improves probably about 9% or 10% or so for couple. And then for single improved about 4% or so. And Jessica mentioned about 3% or so for the Washington state. Yes, it is Oregon. My mistake. It is in Oregon. Jessica, thank you. It is Oregon. It's about 3% for couple and 11% or so for single. So that tells you that we, as an advisors, as a planner, we have obligation and responsibility to mention to client to consider this. If they are not having enough and they own a home and they qualify for it, they ought to consider that as part of their retirement income source. So what does qualification actually means? One of the married couple has to be, the youngest one has to be 62 years old, and they have to use that as a primary residence, and they have to continue to pay for the property and casualty, property taxes and insurance, or even homeowner association fees. They can, otherwise they will default. So those are the general qualifications. They do have to go through the designated HECM counselor to go through the counseling sessions, make sure that they understand before they proceed. All right, so that is the HECM portion of it, but you can't just blindly recommend it to anybody. So what I did was I took the data and then I kind of flipped that a little bit to see not everyone is a good candidate for this particular strategy. So here you go. I kind of look at from net worth perspective, which net worth groups is actually a better off candidate to do this. So as you can see, the left-hand side here, this is for the couple, and this is for the single, and you can see the improvement. So for the net worth of this $500,000 and $250,000 group, you can see the largest improvement for the single is almost 20% here. And for the couple is approximately about 12% or so here. So for someone that net worth range group, if they fall in that range group, this is a good idea for them to consider. And so if you look at the net worth here, that these three groups, basically anything less than $1 million net worth is something worthwhile to consider. And anybody who is over $1 million is not necessarily not a good candidate. The improvement is not as significant as for those family who has less than $1 million net worth. So this is something that at least what you can do is to share that with your clients, your maybe your team members at work as well, because that's something that is value add that you would be considering. Thank you, John, for that comment. The other things that I wanted to point out to you is that there is a, from a HECM perspective or reverse mortgage perspective, that sure, we know that there's improvement based on the net worth, but we also know that based on age group, this is the most time that they will need it. The most improvement will come in when they are getting older. So if you look at the older, above 80, this is the most time they will need that, and the most improvement will come in later age. However, it is wise to have your clients considering HECM when they are younger, because it's a lot cheaper when they have when they are younger. And then if they are using it as a long line of credit, that line of credit will continue to grow as the value of the house continue to grow. So if they are younger and they have an opportunity, definitely take that into consideration, because we know by the calculation I'm showing you here that when they are older, the improvement drastically increase the probability of these older population to be successful in the older age. Now, what I wanted to kind of go through with you is that from the research, what can you do to help your clients? Those numbers are great. Those numbers are great information to share with your clients and to also add value as a conversation point that you can help them understand of leveraging a variety of different assets. If your clients are already in retirement, it might be too late. But if your clients are still accumulating stage, then your advice to them is they ought to be diversifying any type of investment assets. That could include on their real estate, their home, potentially business, potentially they're delaying Social Security, potentially working longer, and their home equity should be the assets to consider as well. If they are already in retirement and then they have those assets, that is a conversation you really ought to have, because you want to make sure they can be successful in their retirement as well. And one of the most important things that I mentioned when I was looking at the state, my comment was that it's not because you want to stay and marry, it's because you want to plan early and plan for whoever is going to be the last person to go. Because if you don't, that may not be enough time to catch up, because the older you get, the harder it is for you to get any kind of assistance, including HECM. Now, the other things to watch out for is that there are so many different other things that we haven't touched on. For example, control spending. Downsizing is a great way, whether or not it's downsizing within the state or downsizing to another state that is cheaper to live in. Relocating is another way, or cohabitating. Golden Girls, the one of the series that I loved when I was younger, that is a cohabitating. That is also an option that people can consider. And most importantly, please be nice to your friends and family. Why do I say that? Just in case if anything failed, you still have a backup plan. You have family and friends and children potentially will let you live with them. So be nice to your friends and family. So how can you help clients besides the data that I show you? At the end of my research, I went through several case study scenario, real client situation that talk about downsizing. How do you use the data point in the research to help your clients? So there's a downsizing to a different state that you can follow through. There's also pension payout options that you ought to be considering. And the other thing is that if delaying Social Security plus working late is an option, there are two examples that I included in the case study where one is business owner, the other one is an immigrant who is considering to move back to their home country. So I went through a scenario like that as well to see if it's a viable solution. And using HECM as a backup, in some states, it makes much more sense compared to other states. And so these are all the things that you can help your clients by looking at their overall retirement balance sheet, not just looking at the financial assets portion of it. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor back to Bobby. If there's any questions, I'll take the questions now. If not, you'll be able to find the information on the screen for the book information. And some of you were asking, will you get the copy of the slide? I will post that slide to our blog website, and then I will have Janet send it out to everybody. And that will have today's recording as well as the slides information. So Bobby?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this great presentation. It was really, it's so fun to have it interactive like that too. And I would have never guessed those numbers. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Oh, it looks like there might be something in the chat box. Oh, thanks for the comments. That's very nice. Let's see. So, you know, I mean, I have a question, and it might be more of a product question though, and so I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but I thought I'd just put that out there. So when we look at a product like that, I think like I worry, like in California, that there are certain limitations to those products, and maybe I'm naive because I haven't had much experience with them. But in regards to how much we can go up and how much real estate is here, of how much a reverse mortgage would be, like how much we could get, or how much, you know, like our property values, is that something that that comes up?
Yeah, so that does come up a lot, and as and what I will do is that in the slides I'm going to include in there, I'm going to include the website from HUD regarding the HECM, and then you can actually see the actual limit. So in California state, as an example, that cap is around the country, not per state. So in California, if you think about it, most of the homes are very high value. And even if the cap is at, let's say, $800,000, it's still sizable money to use. And you don't have to actually take the entire amount. You cannot take the entire amount. There's a percentage that you can take that. So, so the HECM itself, that none of us, unless you are certified by the HUD program, you cannot sell them. You can only refer your clients to go to the HUD website. And from there, they have to do all the homework from that point on. So if it's a good fit for them, it's actually not a bad thing to consider as part of the planning. Did I answer your questions, Bobby?
Of course you did. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I'm just going to check and see. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. So I would like to just invite everybody to a couple of events that are happening, and the one that our next meeting will also be a webinar at this point. And I'm just so glad today was so interactive, being our first webinar. It worked out so nicely, and I'm sure that it's because of Dr. Chien's professionalism. And so we're so lucky to have started with you. You set the bar very high for our webinars. Thank you very much. So our next one will be on May 7th, and that will be, we're actually having the president of Greater Foothill NAIFA will be speaking. Actually, his name is Robert Correll, and he specializes in working with Social Security. And so he's going to go over Social Security and also Social Security with people with disabilities. So it should be very informational. And like I said, the bar has been set. So the other thing is an upcoming event actually tomorrow. We had one of our members, Evan Kidwell, let us know that that Pacific Advisors is doing a presentation for business owners in regards to the stimulus package that's coming out. And so that's for us and for our business owner clients would be interested in maybe tuning into it. It's at 10:30 tomorrow, and Janet's going to have time to send out an invite to everybody in case they can make that. I thank you all for.
Can you hear me? It's Janet. I'm going to be sending that out tonight, so be on the lookout for it.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Well, and thank you all for attending. If you have any questions or if we can help you with membership or programming, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are in business and right now in regards to doing what we can under the